This past summer, I experienced more in 4 months than most people do in their entire life. And I did it all with less money than you probably have in your bank account right now. On April 20th, 2023, my best friend Prit and I left our homes in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to venture out on a road trip totaling more than 23,000 miles through 22 different states, 8 of which I had never been to before. Our first stop was in Fort Myers, Florida, where we met up with our good friend Shay. We spent a lot of time at the beach and eating too much food at FK or Diet. We left Florida, heading north, where we stopped in Nashville to spend a few days there with my older sister. After Nashville, shit started to get real. We headed northwest, like way northwest, damn near into Canada northwest. But first we made stops at Devil's Tower, which is the biggest tree that isn't a tree that I've ever seen, and 10 Sleeps Brewery, where we drank a beer in the middle of nowhere. It was magnificent. Eventually we made it to Glacier National Park, where my jaw dropped and stayed dropped the entire time I was there. I've never seen a place like that in my entire life. You need to go there. From Glacier we headed west through Spokane and into Oregon, where we stopped at Mount Hood and Crater Lake, 2 more things that altered the chemistry of my brain for good. We crossed the border into California, where we jumped in the cold-ass Pacific Ocean and walked through the redwoods stoned to the gills off an edible. The next day we spent in Yosemite, where we met Neil.
Oh yeah, I'll take a cookie.
And he saved Black Betty from having a flat tire.
Neil is the savior. He's a genius. Thank you, Neil.
Yosemite is a magical place, and Neil, you're the man. We ended up in San Diego at Prit's cousin's house, where we did a lot of partying, made some new friends, and had plenty of philosophical conversations with Unc. We dipped from San Diego, slowly making our way east to Colorado Springs. On the way, we passed through Vegas and St. George and Zion, where we got a little taste of that awesome place. When we got to Colorado Springs, Prit and I split up for the first time in 2 months. He went home, and I decided to keep going, alone. I headed west from Colorado Springs to Breckenridge, where I did a hike at an altitude that I've never been at before. I kept going west to see the delicate arch in Moab and cruised through Salt Lake City to the Salt Flats to marvel at that. I made it through northern Nevada and into Lake Tahoe, where I hiked Mount Tulloch and contemplated reality.
Holy fucking shit. This is why I struggle with reality.
After Tahoe, I drove south to meet my wonderful girlfriend in LA for the first time in 2 months, where we spent a week rekindling our relationship and eating a lot of fresh fruit and Dave's hot chicken. She went home and I went back to Black Betty and the road, hanging out in San Diego for a few weeks, stacking up bread, doing DoorDash. After a few weeks in SoCal, my dumbass thought it was a good idea to drive to Death Valley to see the Milky Way in the middle of summer. Somehow, someway, I made it through without overheating Black Betty.
Black Betty's still churning, baby.
Slept on the side of an old highway with my window down. I woke up and zipped to Zion National Park, where I spent 3 days hiking Angel's Landing, the Narrows, and Observation Point. I left Zion, stopped at Great Basin, the most underrated national park in my opinion, and hiked Wheeler Peak, almost. The next morning I was jumping into hot springs on some dude's farm in the middle of Utah. I ended up in Salt Lake City to meet my little sister and girlfriend. We spent a week in Salt Lake, where I did a sunrise hike with an old friend from high school up Mount Timpanogos, and we saw some mountain goats, aka my spirit animal. I left Salt Lake City, but this time I wasn't alone. My girlfriend decided she wanted to get a little taste of what the road is like, so we headed north through Idaho and into Wyoming, where we spent a few wonderful days exploring the majestical Tetons. We drove up through Yellowstone in hopes to see a grizzly bear from the car, but instead we saw this bison rolling around in the dirt. I had to take my girlfriend to my favorite place on earth, so we drove back up to Glacier, where we spent a couple days skinny dipping in the cleanest, coldest, purest water you'll ever see. I love this place with my whole heart. After Glacier, we began the drive back home to good old Pittsburgh. We made a couple stops along the way at Devil's Tower, Cheyenne, Wyoming, and Denver, Colorado, where we spent 1 more day in the mountains before we had to say goodbye for good. After Denver, we whipped to Chicago, where we ate some deep dish and saw the bean. From Chicago, we drove 8 hours straight through the Midwest farmland, making it to Pittsburgh, where I surprised the shit out of my mom. And here I am, back in the Berg, and my only plan is to buy a van and do this shit full time, so stay tuned for that.